Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Philp, elected in 2015 following a career in business, currently a Home Office Minister with responsibility for immigration compliance. Down the line from Wales, Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, biographer and former barrister, Thomas-Symonds. Marie van der Zyl, employment lawyer and president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Joining us down from the line from New York, American financier, Republican and, very briefly, White House head of communications under Donald Trump, Anthony Scaramucci. And Chicago born and bred, now living in the UK, playwright, broadcaster and critic, Bonnie Greer. Good evening, welcome to my guests here in the studio and welcome to Nick and Anthony who are joining us down the line. Very good to see you. And of course, welcome to our audience. Tonight you are from Lincoln. Very good to see you, joining us virtually. Very nice to see you indeed. And thank you for joining us, joining the conversation the usual way, you know how, on social media at BBC Question Time. Let's hear what you've got to say. So let's get started with our first question tonight, which is from David Lane.
Good evening, panel. In view of the report released today by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which identified serious failings by the Labour Party in dealing with anti-Semitic racism, should just one individual be held to account?
Chris.
Well, it's a damning report. It finds the Labour Party acted unlawfully. It finds that Jeremy Corbyn's office effectively covered up 23 different allegations of anti-Semitism. But I think it goes beyond just Jeremy Corbyn. I think Keir Starmer has questions to answer himself. Because for 5 years, Keir Starmer sat on the Labour front bench and said nothing while this was going on. I didn't hear him condemning this activity. I didn't hear him holding Jeremy Corbyn to account. Unlike many other Labour MPs and many Labour front benchers, he didn't resign from that front bench. He said nothing. He defended Jeremy Corbyn. And indeed, he promoted Jeremy Corbyn as a potential Prime Minister less than a year ago. So I think Keir Starmer needs to do two things if he's serious about fixing this. Firstly, he should apologise personally for his failure to speak out on this issue when he was on the front bench, because it was all very convenient for him just to sit there and stay quiet in the hope that he would then take over as leader. Rather cynical, I think. And secondly, he needs to not just suspend Jeremy Corbyn, he should kick Jeremy Corbyn out of the Labour Party, because this report is so damning, and Jeremy Corbyn's response to it this morning, saying the whole thing had been hugely exaggerated for political purposes, was disgraceful. So I think Keir Starmer needs to do those two things if he is really serious about fixing this issue.
And just to be very precise about the report, the Equality and Human Rights Commission report, it found political interference in anti-Semitism complaints rather than, didn't use the word cover-up, but political interference nonetheless. Nick, this is not a comfortable day for you, I imagine. You also were part of the front bench during all this. What do you have to say?
Well, firstly, this is a shameful day for the Labour Party. We accept the findings of the Equality and Human Rights report in their entirety, and we will act on the recommendations. But first and foremost, I want to acknowledge the hurt that has been caused to the Jewish community over the past 5 years. Keir Starmer has expressed our profound sorrow for this. We are profoundly sorry for that hurt that has been caused. And today's report, it's an appalling, damning report that is before us, but we now have to act upon the recommendations of that report. I never thought I'd be sitting on your show, Fiona, after the last Labour government created the Equality and Human Rights Commission and actually be speaking about an investigation and findings into the Labour Party itself, but that's where we are. We will now work to ensure that, yes, our complaints processes are improved, that they are independent, they are where they should be, but we will do more than that. The answer to this isn't just about process, important though that is. It's about changing the culture of our party so that it is a place where everybody feels welcome and everybody feels safe. And what Keir Starmer has done today with a decisive speech of moral clarity is to show the way towards that. I know there is a long way to go, but Keir's speech and our commitment to taking action on this is the start of that road.
Well, talking of moral clarity, one of the things that upset many in the Jewish community, one way of describing it, is Labour's refusal to accept in full the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism. That was in 2018. Now, you endorsed that decision not to accept it. You went out on the airwaves defending the decision not to accept it. Labour changed its position just 2 months later.
I don't think that's a fair characterisation of what I said that day. What I said that day was that the abuse that was being referred to, the appalling anti-Semitic abuse, whatever was in the rule book was absolutely wrong and had to be dealt with. And I also said that the NEC was right to look again at the decision they'd made not to adopt all of the examples that went with the definition. And indeed,
but you didn't accept all those examples, Nick.
Exactly
you didn't accept all those examples, and you went out on the Today programme and other things, out on the airwaves, explaining that Labour should not accept all those examples as part of that definition.
No, that's an unfair characterisation of what I said in the interview with respect, Fiona. What I said was that the NEC were right to look at it again because of the decision that they'd made. They had to look at it again. They did look at it again, and then they made the right decision. But look, I will speak about the fact that I raised the issue of anti-Semitism with members of the Shadow Cabinet. I wasn't in the Shadow Cabinet. I also, when I was out on the media, said that more action had to be taken on anti-Semitism. Keir Starmer spoke in the Shadow Cabinet about it. He spoke out on the media about it. But the reality is this: we all have to accept today the failure of collective leadership. That is what that report makes absolutely clear. I'm not shying away from it. I accept every dot and comma of that report. And what I would say today is, over the period that I've been Shadow Home Secretary, we are under this new leadership of Keir Starmer, we've made tackling anti-Semitism a very top priority. What I've always asked is to be judged on actions, not words. I see today as the start of that, and Keir Starmer showing this morning through that speech what we are now going to do and what we will now do to try to ensure that this scourge of anti-Semitism is driven out of our party and it is a safe and welcoming place, which is the Labour Party that I want to see.
Keir Starmer had 5 years to take action, and in those 5 years, in the Shadow Cabinet, supporting Jeremy Corbyn, he did nothing, and I think he should apologise for that.
Can I just say, I want to talk about trauma, because sometimes politicians talk about issues and they talk about things that I call cold, and they don't talk about things that are hot, and one of those is trauma. I'm a former deputy chair of the British Museum, and I was invited back there about a year and a half ago by the director to create a project around reclamation. And we decided to look at African enslavement and enslavement of people of African ancestry, and to look at trauma, the trauma that a people can hold inside of themselves, even if you didn't experience it yourself. It's handed down by generation through generation through generation through generation, and it's real. And for me, if a Black person tells me they're not safe, they don't feel safe in an environment, that it feels racist, that it is racist, I listen. We have to listen because of that trauma of enslavement. And I'm going to say the same thing about the Jewish people. If Jewish people tell you some place is unsafe for them, they don't feel good, it feels bad, they're holding trauma. And we have to understand that. We have to begin to talk about that. People may think it's trivial, or it didn't exist, or it doesn't mean anything, but the Holocaust was the greatest crime of the 20th century. And we need to teach it in the schools, and we need to understand it at every level that it exists, just as we need to understand the transatlantic slave trade and its impact on people of African descent today. We need to understand the Holocaust and what it means to Jewish people and to Jews and to those of us who aren't Jews. And for the Labour Party, I can't even express how I feel that the Labour Party is caught up in this. I'm a Labour voter. I will always vote Labour. I became a citizen so that I could vote Labour. I will always vote for the Labour Party because I think it's the best coalition of the left for this country. But for this party to be caught up in something like this makes me sick. And I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear all the other stuff. It needed to be dealt with immediately at the top with immediate due diligence. Now, whether Jeremy is an anti-Semite or what, how would I know that? He doesn't look like, he doesn't seem like one to me, but how would I know? The people who know are the people who feel it, and that's who should be listened to.
Marie.
It's been an incredibly painful day. It's a damning incitement of Labour. This is really serious. The EHRC report has found that the Labour Party has committed unlawful acts of harassment and victimisation against Jewish people. It doesn't get any worse than that, does it? And we felt during this time people were making allegations that raising this, as Bonnie said, were smears, some kind of deliberate action. And the Jewish community, we didn't want this fight, but we had to stand up. We had to say this was wrong. We were proud to do that. And today is a damning indictment, as I've said. And what's happened during the course of the last few years is that anti-Semitism was on the fringes of society, and it's been brought straight into mainstream politics, into the political party. Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership made a political decision to ignore, not to tackle anti-Semitism. That is so appalling. It's not imaginable in this day and age. The leadership did nothing about it, and here we are today talking all these years later when this could have been resolved. And not only did the leadership of the party not do anything about it, we've now got findings of interference, political interference by the leader's office. It doesn't get much worse than that, does it?
And Marie, can I ask you, because I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has said again today that he is not anti-Semitic, that anyone who says there was not a problem with anti-Semitism in Labour is wrong. But the question from David is, should just one individual be held to account?
It's a question also of the culture in the party. The problem with anti-Semitism runs deep. This is going to be the beginning of a very long journey. It's all very well the Labour Party saying sorry, and Keir Starmer did give an apology on the day he was elected. But what's important here is that we see action. Words are only so much. We need to see that the action plan is implemented by the 10th of December, and there need to be key changes across the party. We need an independent disciplinary process, education, and to tackle that culture. And this is going to be something that's not going to change overnight. There's a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. It's not one person's fault, but Jeremy Corbyn allowed the space for anti-Semites to come into the party, and the leadership did absolutely nothing about it.
Let's hear from our audience. Jane P.
I, like everybody, been horrified by this story as it's unfolded over the years. And we've heard today that the Labour Party are legally accountable, but really they are an entity, and surely there must be some individual people held accountable. Are there any legal redresses that will ensure that the people behind this really are accountable? It's one thing being expelled from your political party, but to me that isn't enough for the situation that's happened. To drag hate crime into politics is a pretty serious thing, and so against the British way of life.
Paula.
Hello, thank you, Fiona. I want to come back on Nick's point where he said that don't judge by words but judge by actions. Prejudice is often displayed through words, so words do matter. And I want to come back to Chris, because he's very quickly gone in and criticised Keir Starmer, but I would remind him that the Conservative Party has also been accused of racism against people of Islamic faith. So when can we look forward to an investigation into their practices and see some apologies and, of course, some criticism from the top there too?
Yes, Chris, we're still waiting for a report from the Conservative Party into prejudice. It was announced last year. When are we going to see that?
Well, that report is underway. It's independent. It's being conducted by a former commissioner from the ECHR.
And when, Paul is asking, when will we see it?
Well, the work is underway. I can't give you a date tonight, but the work is underway.
It's been almost a year now.
But I would point out there is only one political party in history that has been investigated by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. That is the Labour Party on this anti-Semitism issue. I would also point to the fact that the Conservatives have appointed the most diverse government in British history. We're the first party to have appointed an ethnic minority Chancellor of the Exchequer and the second ethnic minority Chancellor of the Exchequer. We were the first party to appoint an ethnic minority Home Secretary and the second ethnic minority Home Secretary. So we have appointed the most diverse cabinet as a symbol of our commitment to this important issue.
Chris, that's what they used to say to folks when they were desegregating neighborhoods. Oh, well, we have a black person here, you know, in our neighborhood, so we're cool, we're all right. That doesn't wash anymore, okay? You don't judge people like that anymore. We look at human beings. Baroness Varsi has been on you, not you personally, but on the Conservative Party, her party, for years about this. This does not excuse or wash over the Labour Party. I'm not doing that. But there is housework you need to be doing too, and putting people of color in the cabinet does not erase that fact. Can I just?
Yes, do go ahead, because then I must bring Anthony in.
Absolutely. I just want to say, look, the Tories do need to acknowledge there is a problem with Islamophobia in the Tory party, and they do acknowledge they need to do something about it. The Board of Deputies did input into the Singh report, but you've got to look at scale here. The BNP have also been investigated by the EHRC, but so many people in the Labour Party have been investigated. You're not seeing from the Conservative Party MPs fleeing from the party, like Luciana Berger, a pregnant woman at the Labour Party conference. She even had to have security. Louise Ellman, she had to flee the party after 55 years. So you're not seeing the same level of scale, even though there are problems that have to be addressed in the Conservative Party.
And Auntie, let me bring you in here. I mean, how is this looking to you on the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I'm going to light a novena candle and say, thank God I'm not involved in British politics. I got my own problems on this side of the pond. But here's what I would say, and I mean this very respectfully to Chris, and because I'm relating to what Bonnie is saying about tokenism. And I think what we find in our societies that we have to break down the systemic and institutional racism. And so if the racists think you're a racist, well, guess why you're a racist? And if the anti-Semites think you're an anti-Semite, you're likely an anti-Semite. Even if you're not doing it intentionally, there are systemic and institutional biases. And I think the point that Bonnie's making, which I'd like to hammer, is that you can't say, well, you know, one of my best friends is black, and therefore I'm not a racist. I mean, you just can't do that, okay? It's tokenism. What we have to do is what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said a long time ago, is judge each other by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And by the way, I grew up in a very patriarchal Italian-American immigrant family. And so, you know, you're also biased by the way you grow up. And it's important for you to seek that enlightenment and to make that transformation. And we need to do it as a culture and a civilization. It has to be at the institutional level. So it's got to be at the Labour level and at the Conservative level, frankly.
But these appointments I mentioned earlier, they're not tokenistic, right? The people I'm talking about, who are my friends and colleagues.
You talked about it like that, Chris. Chris,
hang on, let me finish the point. Let me finish the point.
Important. It's important.
I know it's important.
It's important, Chris, because it's important for you, because you're a good guy. It's what Anthony is saying to you, what I'm saying, it's important for you to take it in. It doesn't matter, okay? What matters is what you do. And that's what we're saying. It doesn't matter that you've got a black and brown cap. It doesn't matter. And that's what people are in the streets are about now. It doesn't matter. It's what you do. And if you pursue policies and you stay the same way, you can have whatever. It don't matter. And that's what I'm trying to say to you. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's important for you to get it inside yourself.
And by the way, she means it respectfully, too. I just want to interject.
Well, I don't know if I do.
She means it very respectfully. She's trying to... Yeah, she's giving you the benefit of the doubt. You're not racist. She's just trying to tell you that you're in a systematic web.
Well, that's the South Side.
You may not sometimes see things the way minorities see them.
Well, the point I was making is that my colleagues in government are not there for reasons of tokenism. They're there because they're incredibly talented, energetic, hardworking,
you didn't hear anything I said.
Dynamic people. And of course, I understand we've got to dismantle any barriers to anyone achieving their potential, because as in the words of Martin Luther King Jr. that Anthony quoted a minute ago, what matters is the content of someone's character, their ability, their talent. We should be unfettered. People should be able to go as far as
I never used the word
they can run.
token. You did.
No,
You used
I
it
didn't.
twice. I never said token.
He did. Someone did. It wasn't me.
I never
I
said
think
token.
today we should concentrate a bit more on the Labour Party anti-Semitism, because when you look at what Jeremy Corbyn did this morning in his speech, he totally tried to say that it wasn't so important. He even tried to suggest he'd made improvements, and he's someone that's got to accept responsibility. And I think the lessons from the Labour Party are what we should be really focusing on today.
Let's hear a bit more from our audience. Lots of hands up. Donna.
Just going back to the culture of the Labour Party, I think since the appointment of Keir Starmer, I think he really has stamped a clear message regarding it. OK, yes, we can't turn back what's happened, but hopefully with the message he sent out with obviously the dismissal of Rebecca Long-Bailey early doors, I think that sends hopefully a clearer message going forward.
Alex?
As a young person that's been brought up being taught about the horrors of the Holocaust, I feel like it's absolutely ludicrous that things like this are still happening in today's politics, and the people need to be held accountable for it.
I agree, absolutely. You don't expect anti-Semitism in the opposition party. It's unimaginable, let alone being found guilty of victimisation and harassment.
Miles?
Good evening. I think it's a terrible shame to see what the Labour Party did. But as MPs, how are we going to change that in the future so that there is no hate crime in any political party anywhere, and that anybody who does work for the government, who wants to become a member of Parliament, they know that they are safe where they're working?
So, Nick, let's have a final word from you. I mean, the one question from Jane was about, is any legal action going to be taken against anyone in the Labour Party? And how are you going to change the culture within the party from here on in?
Well, firstly, I mean, since Keir Starmer became the leader, we've had, I think it's nearly up to around about 300 cases dealt with in our complaints system. Now, that's, just to give a sense, that's more than in the whole of 2019. So clearly, Keir has been trying to make progress on individuals being held to account since he became leader.
But Jane was asking very specifically, is there any prospect of legal action being taken against anyone in the party, given the report that came out today?
Well, look, I can't comment on whether individuals want to take legal action around particular bits of the report. But obviously, number one, I say that we will, of course, be holding people to account. That's why we're going to improve our complaint system. And Marie asked me, very fairly about how we will do that going forward. We have to put an action plan together now by the 10th of December. We will be reaching out, and Marie knows this, to the Board of Deputies, to the Jewish Labour movement, to the wider Jewish community as we do that, to ensure that we do have a system, that there is no political interference, that is properly resourced, that people are properly trained, that is transparent, that has proper rules about what sanctions are appropriate, so everyone can have confidence in that. But there is, as I say, a wider question here. That process is vitally important, and we will put it in place. But there's a fair challenge too about changing the culture, and we change the culture through leadership. We change it through leadership by what Keir Starmer has been saying and doing over the past 6 months. I mean, one of the reasons I backed Keir for leader was those conversations I had with him about his determination to tackle this issue. He set that out and made that apology in his acceptance speech back in April, and he's been putting that into action since. And it's that leadership that is going to be vital to bring about that cultural change we need. Marie is absolutely right to say that isn't going to happen overnight, but we are determined to make that happen and to work at it.
I'm going to take another question in a moment, but before we do that, I just want to say that we're looking for people to join our virtual audience of programmes coming up. Next week, we are in Lewisham, in South East London, virtually, of course, and the week after that in Dover. So if you live in either of those two places or thereabouts, do get in touch on the Question Time website. You can fill in the form there and come and be part of the audience. We'd love to see you. Question Time isn't Question Time without an audience, so do come and be part of it. Right, we'll take our second question now, which is from Helen Bonnet.
Given the global importance of the USA, should people in the UK be concerned that the real choice Americans appear to have is to vote for who they consider is the least worst candidate for the role of president.
Well, Anthony, obviously I'm going to come to you here first. I mean, you were, head of communications for one of those least worst candidates, as Helen puts it. What's your view?
Well, it's the unfortunate byproduct of our system. So we get two choices. And so some of it is a calibration of exactly what she is saying. I do agree that there's a least of the two evils, if you will. But I think this is totally different this time. I mean, we have one person that is threatening the system, a 244-year-old system known as the American experiment. We have one person that wants to take polling stations away, remove mail sorting machines, remove post office boxes, and the rhetoric coming from that person is a disaster for the United States. The president of the United States is suggesting that he may or may not accept a peaceful transfer of power. And so I've called on all patriots in the United States to put aside their partisanship and seek a higher order, which is patriotism, and look at that. And then when you compare that person to the vice president, he has his shortcomings for sure. But I'm reminded of what Mayor Ed Koch once said about politics. Mayor Koch was campaigning in 1978. He said, well, if you like 9 out of the 12 things that I'm saying, you should vote for me. But if you like 12 out of the 12 things I'm saying, you need a psychiatrist. And I think that the point being is that there's no politician that's perfect in terms of the fingerprint of the voter and the politician. So for me, I want that return to normalcy for the United States. I want it for the world. And so I've been a big supporter as a Republican alongside of the Lincoln Project and others here in the United States of the Vice President Joe Biden.
But obviously you were a big supporter of Trump. You were his cheerleader, his public voice. I think it was 10 days, wasn't it, I think, Anthony? I mean, if he just...
That was 11.
Oh, 11, oh, forgive me.
Last day, Fiona, it was a big thing for me.
So sorry. I mean, you've been very, very critical of Donald Trump since then. But would it be fair to say, if he hadn't sacked you, you'd still be working for him now?
Well, I mean, I just want to get everybody the timeline so that they know. I started working for him in July of 2017. I was fired abruptly 11 days later, and I accept responsibility for that. I did something fireable. I never once blamed anybody. And then for 2 years, Fiona, I tried to stay loyal to the president and to the president's agenda. You could see me on countless shows trying to advocate on behalf of Republican policies and what the president was doing. But he made it impossible. If you're separating women and children at the border, if you're denouncing the American intelligence agencies in front of the Russian president, if you're calling the press the enemy of the people, if you're using racist nativist tropes against American congresswomen known as the Squad, it just became impossible. And so he was moving the goalposts, and I said, okay, I can no longer accept this sort of behavior. And so, that's what happened. And what I would say to you is the facts are changing. You change your opinion. Now, my liberal friends would say to me, well, he's the same guy that he was in 2015. So he's doing the exact same things here in 2020. So why did you change? You must be a bitter employee. Well, I wouldn't have been supporting him for 2 years if I was a bitter employee. But what I say to my liberal friends is that he may not have changed, Fiona, but I've changed. I've become way more psychologically minded, way more empathetic to what is actually going on and what the struggle is right now for working class families in the United States. I grew up in a working class family. My dad was an hourly worker, but it was an aspirational working class family where we were in the middle class. Many of those families today, Fiona, are economically desperational. Mr. Trump, I thought, was going to represent them in Washington, but it turns out he was really just representing himself.
Bonnie.
I want to go back to the question with respect to the questioner. We use a term like least worst. What are we selecting, pizzas? This is the problem. We don't talk about leadership. What does least worst mean? What do we want in a leader? So we've got a leader here who we got off the television, basically. And America, he's off the television too. Is that what we're about? We need to check ourselves. Our leader is us. If we think the leader is somewhere remote up in the stratosphere, we're going to get what we deserve. I don't know what least worst is. I've lived through a lot of presidents, and I know what a leader is, and we need to talk about leadership. That's one of the problems with the Labour Party and the problems with the Conservative Party. It's a leadership issue. It's a leadership issue. And Anthony, let me just say something to you. First of all, let me give you your respect. The last 2 years, you have been incredible in terms of coming clean on TV in front of people. You published a book. You're behind the incredible Lincoln Project of conservatives and Republicans who are actually trying to save conservatism and make it decent again. But the other thing that you did, because of your charisma, your intelligence, you normalized Donald Trump. And that's the problem. And I'm not saying it's just you. I'm talking about all of you very intelligent people at the beginning who flocked around this man because of your political beliefs. Donald Trump was out of order for 30 years. It just didn't happen. So we're now having to deal with talking about least worst as if we're talking about choosing a television host instead of the leader of the free world. This is horrible. This is a horrible position for us to be in. And so I just want to say that to you. And again, thank you guys for what you're doing on the right, for helping getting Joe elected. But it's a mess. It's a terrible, horrible mess. The norms of the United States are in trouble. The norms in this country are in trouble. And norms are what make civilization. And that's what we have to go back to at the inauguration.
Anthony, do you want to come back on?
Well, if it's okay, can I respond to Bonnie? Would that be okay?
Of course.
Just quickly. Okay, so number one, I agree with what you're saying, but what I would also say to you is that as a lesson, basically, I have tried to own that, Bonnie, in the public domain. I've tried to explain to people that it was my pride that drew me to Mr. Trump. Many of my Republican friends who I would say were mainstream Republicans were doing the same thing. Doesn't take away from me at all. If anything, it makes me accountable for my decision making. I have to live with it for the rest of my life. Having said that, being willing to admit it and being willing to break away and trying to create an off-ramp for other people is something I've been dedicated to for the last.
That's why I gave you your respect at the beginning, Anthony. That's why I did that.
And I appreciate that, but I want everybody to know that's watching this show, you have to be very careful with your decision making because you can get your pride and ego involved with your decision making, and then your emotions are going up and your intelligence is going down. And for me, I had a self-narrative that was ego-based. I grew up in this blue-collar family. I had some measure of financial success in the United States, and I wanted to work in that White House. And I was normalizing the president because I said, okay, he's the successor of Abraham Lincoln and Dwight Eisenhower. He can't actually be this crazy.
But he was.
Because I was overriding rationality. And I have to own that. And I'm just telling that as a cautionary tale for others. Try to put your pride and ego aside when you're making decisions that are political or relationship-based or in your business.
Paula.
Thank you, Fiona. I hear what Anthony is saying, and it seems that some Republicans are getting buyer's remorse and regretting that Donald Trump is their representative in the presidential race. But they've had opportunities through impeachment and others to, as it were, remove him. Why didn't they take them? Did they put wanting to hold on to power ahead of what was good for their country?
Yes.
David.
Can I ask all the panel if what they think will happen in the United States if Mr. Trump is re-elected? Will they remain united?
All right, I will come to that in a moment. William, you had your hand up.
Trump's very divisive in what he does. He's looking after number one, I think. But unfortunately, there's millions of votes for him. So it might be closer than you think next week.
Well, Marie, the question from Helen was, should people in the UK be concerned? And you know, Donald Trump, he's behind in the polls, it's steadily behind at the moment, but who knows what could happen. Should people, are you concerned?
I definitely think I'm concerned because whatever happens in the US is going to impact right round the world. In terms of the Jewish community, a recent poll from the American Jewish Committee said that 75% of Jews would vote Democrats. And certainly Trump has been a very divisive figure, and personally for me, he hasn't disavowed himself of his associations with the right wing or white supremacists. But in terms of foreign policy, he has done some good things in the Middle East. For example, he has helped to normalise relations with Israel. and Dubai and other countries.
What with the UAE and Bahrain?
With the UAE and Bahrain recently. And of course, we've got Brexit, which hasn't yet been mentioned on this programme.
It's very, it's not as often as it used to.
Absolutely. Coming up, and at the moment, the UK has a very strong relationship with the US, a special relationship. And of course, I'm going to be very concerned if there was a Biden president, will that relationship carry on? But what I have.
So would you rather it was Trump?
I want somebody with the right values. Values are what matter to me, because we're talking about worse and least worse, but I want to see the person who's got those values, who's going to be a leader. We've seen what's happened with the Labour Party in this country.
So which of the two would it be, just out of interest?
I think it's a very difficult position. I'm not a US citizen. But I am looking for values, and as I said, historically, the Jewish community, 75% of them would usually be voting Democrats. But I am very, very worried at the outcome, whatever happens.
How can you make peace with two countries that Israel's not even at war with? Okay, and number two, leaving the Palestinians out of anything. They weren't even at the table.
You're talking about the deal that Trump has proposed.
I mean, how is that a peace deal? And that's the con that Donald Trump lays down. The first racist demonstration after Donald Trump became president was in Charlottesville. A Jewish girl was killed. This was guys walking down the street looking like something out of the Nuremberg rallies saying Jews will not replace us. Now, I don't get it, okay? I really don't get it, how anybody can talk about backing this man with that kind of thing. It's a con. It's a total con. And to leave the Palestinians out of this is another part of the con.
All I've said, in fairness to him, is that in terms of foreign policy, the Abraham Accords and the normalisation of relationships is important for the
But don't
region.
you see the 300, that's what I was talking about when I was talking about trauma. I'm talking about the 360 degrees of this. How can you look at that and then look at, Joe Biden came into the presidency because of Charlottesville. That literally was white guys walking down. You saw it.
Listen, I agree that...
Explain it to me.
That Trump is very divisive.
No, explain that to me, please. I'm asking you because I don't understand. I don't understand how a Jewish person can say that, okay, he made peace over there, but yet the anti-Semitism, Semitic tropes of QAnon, which is gaining a hold in this country, and Charlottesville, I don't get it. You have to explain it to me, honestly, you have to.
I just want to confirm to you that where there have been policies like the travel ban to Muslim countries, the Board of Deputies, we've criticised Trump. We don't hesitate to criticise his policies.
How do you feel about policies?
Okay, let me bring Nick in, or else
we'll it'll be
a conversation just with you two, riveting though that is. In fairness, I must bring the rest of the panel in. Nick, how... I presume you're supporting Biden, obviously. Should we be concerned here that we're looking at the two least worst candidates, as Helen says?
Well, look, it's a decision for the American people between the two candidates. I don't think it will come as a surprise to say that if I were in America and able to vote in this election, I'd be supporting the Democrats. And obviously, I share the concerns about divisive language. Of course, I absolutely do, and have spoken out in the past around things like the travel ban. But at the same time, I think we have to recognise this election will take place next week. It's a decision for the American people. And our relationship with America, it's not related to one president or one era. It goes back over generations. There are cultural, political, economic ties, and there are huge challenges around the world, not the coronavirus crisis, climate change, just to name two of them, that we have to work with the winner of this presidential election on. At the same time, of course, be a critical friend to America and hold their president to account and be critical too when necessary. And that's the approach that a Labour government would take to the winner of this presidential election. It's
going to be a bit tricky for the government, Chris, if Joe Biden gets in, isn't it? He's had some strong things to say about the internal market bill, for example, as has Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in Congress.
Well, I mean, Joe Biden has said he respects the result of the Brexit referendum. And look, I'm actually on the same page.
No, that's not what I'm referring to, as you well know, Chris. Do you want me to find you the quote? I've got it written down here somewhere. You know what he said.
Going through the papers, let me just say, I'm on broadly the same page as Nick on this, actually. I will respect and trust the judgment of the American people in this
Any
election.
trade deal between the US and the UK must be contingent upon respect for the Good Friday Agreement, preventing the return of a hard border.
Well, that's a bit of luck, because we plan to respect the Good Friday Agreement. In fact,
he's concerned that you're not, which is why I made the point, as you well know. So my point is, are you concerned that if Biden wins, the relationship between the British government and America might be slightly less warm?
No, I'm not concerned, for two reasons. Firstly, we intend to respect the Good Friday Agreement. We have been bending over backwards to respect the Good Friday Agreement for the last 3 or 4 years since the Brexit vote happened. So I've got no concerns at all on that front. But to make a more general point, I mean, the Conservatives in government have worked closely with Republican presidents like Dwight Eisenhower and Ronald Reagan. We've worked closely with Democrat presidents like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, like Clinton, like Obama. And to be fair, Labour governments in office have done the same as well. So whoever occupies the White House as the world's leading economy, as our closest and longest standing ally, we will always work closely and cooperatively with America, whoever occupies that great office. I trust the American people to make their own decision. I'm not sure, Bonnie, do you have a vote, Bonnie, in this election?
Well, I'm an American citizen, of course I do, and I
Right.
have one here as well.
Okay, you're very lucky then.
Let me just
briefly, Bonnie, because I do want to move on to another subject.
That Nancy Pelosi, Leader of the House, and she will be Leader of the House on Tuesday, she ratifies the deal. So I hope you guys are right that you're not disturbing the GFA. Joe Biden is Irish. Joe Biden is Irish. He's not going to play with that.
Well, nor are we.
Okay, good. I'm just hearing.
Let's take another question now. I can't believe we're coming to it this late in the programme in one sense, because it's been first in the programme for months now. Paul Stalibras.
Yes, good evening, Fiona. Good evening, panel. A recent study from Imperial Forecasting suggests that COVID-19 deaths in Wave 2 could far exceed those in Wave 1. Given that France, Germany and UK devolved administrations are either in or have announced a total lockdown, why is the UK government so reluctant to follow suit?
Nick.
Well, I'm speaking to you from Wales, Fiona, this evening, and I'm not in the studio because, of course, we are in day 6 of our firebreaker, our 17-day firebreaker here in Wales. And that action is being taken here in Wales to try to get on top of the virus. And I think that that is the appropriate thing to do. And I think if we look at the situation in England, I think we are at a critical moment. Keir Starmer argued for a circuit breaker of 2 to 3 weeks. I understand that time is passing, of course it is, but I think it is that action is required. And I think it is absolutely clear that what we have to do now is to make sure that we not only have that circuit breaker, but we also, that time is used to get on top of test, trace and isolate.
Nick, I'm just going to jump in because not only, Nick,
circuit breaker to get
Nick, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to jump in because not only are you in a circuit breaker, it looks like your computer's having a bit of a circuit breakdown as well. Yeah. And we can hear you, but we can't see you. So I will try and come back to you as soon as we manage to get that reinstated. Chris, coming back to the question, if you've got France and Germany and the devolved administrations in lockdown of a sort, I mean, Germany is going to lockdown. It's got half as many new cases a day as us and a fraction of the number of deaths every day. Surely it's just a matter of time, isn't it?
Well, each country is different, and we need to carefully balance the right approach for our country. Now, we have different...
But it's surely... I know you're not going to come on here tonight and say, yes, we're definitely going to introduce a lockdown. Well, but anyone listening thinks, and looking at the graphs, must be thinking it's just a matter of time.
Look, I think we have really different circumstances in different regions of the country. For example, the east of England only has 1/4 the cases that the northwest does.
But cases are rising everywhere.
The World Health Organization and indeed the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Van Tam, have both said that the regional approach makes sense. We have to balance the profound impact that a hard lockdown would have on children's education, on mental health, on people seeking, for example, cancer treatment, on jobs. We have to balance those considerations against the health consideration and try and get it right. Respect the fact, understand the fact that things are working differently in different parts of the country. So that is why this careful balance, very well calibrated, balanced approach has been taken. Now, clearly that will be kept under review. And if the facts change, you know, a different decision may get taken in the future.
I mean,
but
seriously,
but it's the right approach.
I'm just listening to you go through that, and I've got no crystal ball and I have no medical knowledge, but just watching the graphs, watching the fact that cases are increasing everywhere, are you going to end up coming back in, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks and saying, we've watched the facts, they've changed, now we're going in for a lockdown?
Well, look, I don't have a crystal ball, and it would be, I think, rash and foolish to make firm predictions about what's going to happen in the future. What I can say is that right now, today, looking at the regional differences, looking at the costs that a full lockdown would impose on people's health, mental health, children's education, health treatment, jobs and so on, the balance being struck is the right one. And as I say, the World Health Organization agree with that. But it is, of course, kept under review the whole time, which is a sensible thing to do.
Donna, you're shaking your head there. And I know, because I spoke to some of you in the audience before we came on air, you've been shielding with your husband for 8 months now, haven't you?
Yeah. So I'd just like to come back to that point. So me and my husband have been in shielding since obviously the 23rd of March. Just to give you a brief idea, my husband partway through this went on to kidney dialysis. So my question really is the shielding group, the 2.2 million people at the end of March that got these letters, who were petrified to go out of their homes. We couldn't even go into our gardens. Now the cases are going absolutely through the roof. Where is the common sense? And I know obviously that there is treatments, but can I just highlight there's thousands of people waiting for organ donations across this country. And as I spoke to Fiona earlier, the plight of my husband and many others in the same situation is being put on a list, to be taken off a list, to be put back on the list. Now, my fear is that we're going to get back to routine operations, transplantation getting stopped. It's already happening in Leeds, it's already happening in Nottingham. And you talk about the tier system. Now, I live in West Lindsey, which at the minute is relatively low in tier 1. However, literally to the 2 miles at the side of me is Nottinghamshire, who's gone into tier 3 from Friday, and also bordering is South Yorkshire, and from I think Saturday we've now got North Lincolnshire and East Hull. So with all due respect, it's a matter of time before, so surely we should jump on this bandwagon now before it gets any worse.
Carl, you've got your hand up, and I know you're working as a contact tracer at the moment, so you've got a very particular view of this. What's your response?
Yeah, well, I think we've already proved that lockdowns don't work. We've tried them before, and all it's doing is kicking the can down the road.
Yep.
And as soon as you let people out again, people are back to square one, being exposed to the virus.
So what do you think the answer is?
Well, I think we should start looking at different models, like Sweden, for example. Sweden tried a completely different approach to anywhere else, pretty much in Europe, and have had no massive rise in cases, any different to anywhere else in Europe. They didn't lock down, they just enforced the social distancing, bars stayed open, pubs stayed open, schools stayed open, and people carried on pretty much as normal.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're second trouble.
There were quite a few restrictions in Sweden.
Yeah,
but
Sweden's in trouble. They tried herd immunity. That's what you're talking about. And Sweden got in some trouble with that. I think one of the things, and the lady who spoke, I commiserate with her. I've been separated from my husband since February. We can't be together. The same thing in the United States. We don't have any leadership. We don't have a leader. This isn't some kind of thing you put on a newspaper, on a graph, and stand up behind a podium and talk to people with holding graphs up and charts. The only truth here is COVID. COVID is the truth. And then you move from there, and we work to unite the country. We're all in this together. We're in this together. We're not tiers and all of this. We're together. So we need a leader who can talk to us together. The United States of America has 51 solutions running around there because the leadership refuses to take responsibility. We need a leader here.
Anthony.
Well, I mean, I agree once again. I think that the biggest problem is, again, think about what Joe Biden was saying. He wants to shut down the virus, but not necessarily the economy. And so if you just went to the protocol and standards in South Korea, who had experience with MERS and SARS, and we just copied their best practices, we would be well on our way, whether it's the United Kingdom or the United States. I'll just point out, South Korea, 20 deaths per million on a per capita basis. United States, 620 deaths per million. And I know the United Kingdom is suffering alongside of the United States. So to me, it's very simple. We have a tendency for myopia. We have a tendency to think that our Anglo-Saxon way of doing things is a priori. But I think we should be copying the South Koreans right now and adopting their practices. And then you will see both of our economies flourish.
And from your personal knowledge of Donald Trump, what's driving his reaction to coronavirus? Is it, as many have said, it's purely electioneering, or is it something more than that?
It's personality. I mean, he's the most insecure person that you could ever meet in your life, Fiona. So he's reflexively contrarian. If he has Jim Mattis in front of him, tell him what to do, he'll do the opposite. If he has Anthony Fauci in front of him, he'll tell him to do the opposite. He's insecure about having experts in make him feel inferior. And so he's classically mishandling things. I think that's one of the more startling things about him when you think about his achievements. He ascended to the American presidency, but yet he's not somebody that can handle conversations intellectually with experts. He wants to run the American presidency as a one-man West End or Broadway play. It's nonsensical. And so there's great frustration in the United States. He's politicized the science. He's lied to people about the science. And he's right now, as we're speaking, flying around the battleground states, creating super spreader events. I mean, who does this? You want to talk about leadership. One of the things that both countries need right now is direct points of honesty, and stop shading things, stop spinning things. Just say, look, here are the facts. This is what we have to do as a country if we want to make ourselves less sick. Yeah. The President of the United States has made our country sicker, weaker, and poorer. Can't speak for the British Prime Minister. You guys know that politics better than I do. We got to cut it out. We've got to cut it out. And so that's it.
So, Marie, bringing you back to Paul's question is, why is the UK government so reluctant to follow suit of other countries like France and Germany that are going into various permutations of a lockdown?
Well, we have to remember that some of the countries that did really well the first time round are now also taking emergency measures, and they're in lockdown. And here in the UK, the Jewish community have suffered heavily with death, as have many people from ethnic minorities. And I want to commend the report of Doreen Lawrence, and I know that there has been the PHE report as well.
The Public Health England report.
Public Health England, quite so, report from the government. I think what's got to be sensible here is a pragmatic approach, an integrated approach. We are seeing local lockdowns. We may have to see national lockdowns here, but what we need is effective, quick testing, and we need the track and trace up and working. We don't want it to be overwhelmed. But yes, it does need leadership, but I can't say that I'm in favour of the Swedish model, because that's it's not working. I mean, it's obvious. Now, the figures seem really, really large in America, but you've got to remember the population is so much bigger here. But we, of course, are horrified at seeing these super spreader events. So there's no easy answer. It's the only time I can remember in my lifetime, though, where the whole world is cooperating on a vaccine, at least. Even that's not going to solve the problem. But what's the answer? I can't give you that.
Well, Billy, you're a doctor, and you talk to your colleagues on the front line. What is the answer? What's your view?
There's not an easy solution, I'm afraid, to the current problem. Certainly adopting the Swedish model would adversely affect the health and well-being of many NHS and health and social care staff. Also, I don't think the test and trace system is a solution at this point in time either. The system is most effective in the early stages of a pandemic. As case numbers rise, we need to become less reliant on the test and trace system and more reliant on social distancing and, in fact, full lockdown measures. The problem is the rate of infection rises beyond the capacity of the test and trace system quite quickly.
Nick, can I let you come back in, because we lost you for a bit there before you managed to finish your point. Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm not sure what happened there, but just to say, first of all, that Chris mentions about threat to the economy, but the biggest threat to the economy is a virus that we're just simply not on top of and is out of control. Now, to get the virus under control, we need, obviously, the testing system, but we need the tracing system. If you're to have an effective tracing system, you need to be tracing over 80% of the contacts. Now, here in Wales, with a locally led system, we're over that 80% figure. That, unfortunately, isn't the case in England. And the reason we're arguing for that circuit breaker in England is to give that opportunity to get that system to work. But also, too, just to be clear, we're not suggesting that in that scenario the schools should close. Schools, we should do all we can to keep schools open, because we know the damage it does to educational attainment with children being out of school. But the reality is we are in a situation in England where the virus, the government has lost control of the virus, and the time is slipping away for them to actually take this measure of getting a circuit break in place to try and get back in control and get back on top of testing.
But Nick, we just before you said, we heard Billy there, who's a doctor, saying that once you get to a certain level of numbers of cases, test and trace becomes less effective and easily becomes overwhelmed. And in Wales, where there's a greater success with test and trace, nonetheless, cases are going up.
Well, yes, cases are on the rise, and that's why we've taken the measure that we have. Now, that measure came into place last Friday. It'll be for 17 days, and obviously we will then, as we come out of it, see what the impact of that has been. But I think taking the diligent, cautious approach that has defined the approach to the virus and the leadership of Mark Drakeford here in Wales has been the way to approach it. And the reality is that with the tiered system in England, I'm afraid it's just not the case that areas are permanently coming out of the restrictions or permanently coming out of the tiers. The figures are very sadly going in one direction. And I want to see the government in England getting on top of the virus in the way that we're attempting to do so here in Wales.
Now, Paul, you asked the question. Do you want to have the last word on that?
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. Yes. I lost my father and my wife, both to long-standing health issues in 2019.
Oh, I'm so sorry
and
to
I
hear that.
I actually feel fortunate that they died last year, because we were able to give them a dignified and fitting funeral. The families of almost 46,000 COVID victims, which you're broadcasting from Lincoln, is half the population of Lincoln. Go onto Lincoln High Street whenever, every other person you see, that is the level that people have died. Any delay to a second national lockdown only risks a similar number of families suffering this heartache, where you can't be at your loved one's bedside when they take that last breath. You can't even give them a fitting and dignified send-off. It is appalling. And it needs to happen now, tonight, from 10:30, 11:30. Not 3 weeks in the future. It needs to happen now.
Well, you've made your point, Paul, and I'm so sorry for your loss last year. Thank you very much for that. Chris, I think you want to come back here, but I'm afraid our hour is up. Our questions tonight came from Lincoln. Thank you very much to all of you for making your points, and didn't manage to get all of you in, so forgive me for that. Next week, our audience comes from Lewisham, and on the panel we have the Hollywood actor Rose McGowan, the former Brexit secretary David Davis, and the mathematician and TV presenter Hannah Fry. So it should be quite a programme. And then the following week, our questions come from Dover, and there, amongst others, we'll be joined by the former Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow. So do get in touch if you live in either of those areas and you want to be on the programme. We'd love to hear from you. As I say, go to the Question Time website and fill in the form there, and that's how you do it. Adrian Charles and guests are coming up on 5 Live now with Question Time Extra Time, as always, and that's your chance rather to carry on the conversation. You can see on the screen how to join in.
And thank you, Lincoln Project.
And okay, Bonnie says thank you, Lincoln Project. And the people of Lincoln, the important thing.
And the people of Lincoln.
So thank you very much to all of you in the studio tonight. Thank you very much to the people of Lincoln for joining us, and thank you very much, Nick and Auntie, joining us down the line. Great to have you with us from Question Time. Bye-bye.